History of English Literature. Victorian Age, 1830 to 1890. Brief questions with answers, Part A, Episode 2. Question 26. What role does nature play in Victorian literature? Answer. Victorian poetry is an outcome of Romantic poetry. The Victorian authors were greatly influenced by the English Romantic poets and their attitude to nature. But Victorian poets are different in their treatment of nature. They use nature in the backdrop of human activity. In other words, nature in Victorian literature is reflective of human mood. Romantic poets romanticized or spiritualized nature, but Victorian poets humanized nature. Question 27. Who is called an un-Victorian poet in the Victorian literature? Answer. Robert Browning is called an un-Victorian poet in the Victorian age because he does not deal with the crisis of the Victorian age but with universal human drama. He is interested in man-woman relationship of all ages. Question 28. What was the popular form of poetry in Victorian age? Answer. Dramatic monologue was the popular form of poetry of the Victorian age. Tennyson chose dramatic monologue to write about the age and Browning chose monologue to write about himself. Question 29. What is a dramatic monologue? Answer. Dramatic monologue is a kind of poem in which a speaker speaks about his crisis to an audience, real or imaginary. In a monologue, one speaker speaks not only about himself but he speaks on behalf of all other characters and describes every incident that takes place. Question 30. What is the source of Tennyson's poetry? Answer. The source of Tennyson's poetry is Greek mythology and medieval legend. Tennyson used myths to reflect the spirit of the Victorian age. He rewrites mythical stories poetically. Question 31. What is the source of Browning's poetry? Answer. Italian art, life and culture is the background of Browning's poetry. Browning makes use of Italian Renaissance to write about himself, to express his views on art, love and life. Question 32. Who is called elegiac poet in the Victorian age? Answer. Matthew Arnold is known as an elegiac poet of the Victorian age. The cause of his melancholy is the widespread immortality of the age and erosion of values. Arnold composes elegies to lament for the loss of values for the Victorian age. Question 33. What does Victorian compromise mean? Answer. Victorian compromise means the compromise between science and religion, faith and doubt, which were widespread in the Victorian age. Question 34. What is meant by Victorianism? Answer. Victorianism is a term often used with reference to the Victorian age. The term Victorian means precisely Victorian poets who praised the spirit of progress of the age. They were concerned with their age and not with other ages. Therefore, Victorianism refers to the rapidly changing characteristics of Victorian literature. Question 35. What influence of Romantic poetry do you find on Victorian poetry? Answer. The ideas of Romantic poetry greatly influenced the Victorian poetry. Like the Romantic poets, Victorian poets used nature in their poetry. Their description of nature is sensuous, colorful and vivid, just like the Romantic poets. However, Victorian poets do not spiritualize nature like the Romantic poets. They use nature as reflective of human mood. Question 36. Point out one or two salient features of the Victorian age. Answer. Victorian age was an age of discovery and rapid changes. The spirit of adventure, the conflict between science and religion, democratic ideas, expansion of industrialization, the liberation of women, expansion of trade and commerce, etc. are some of the important characteristics of the age. Question 37. Whose poetry is termed as a criticism of life in Victorian literature? Answer. Arnold's poetry is called a criticism of life. Arnold, in his poetry, tried to reflect the religiousness of the Victorian people. He laments for the sea of faith. He makes an intellectual criticism of Victorian life and society. Question 38. Who is the author of the novel A Tale of Two Cities? Answer. Charles Dickens has written his famous novel A Tale of Two Cities. It is a historical novel referring to the incidents of French Revolution. The historical events of French Revolution have been given a novelistic expression in his novel. Question 39. What are the cities referred to in the novel A Tale of Two Cities? Answer. The cities referred to in the novel A Tale of Two Cities are Paris and London. The historical events of French Revolution have been given a fictionalized form by Dickens in his novel. Question 40. How are women portrayed in Dickens' novel A Tale of Two Cities? Answer. Dickens presented woman as a partner of man in the reconstruction of the society. Women are not portrayed traditionally as beautiful. He does not present women from emotional point of view. Rather, he presents women realistically. Women possess manly equality. Question 41. Who is the author of Heroes and Hero Worship? Answer. Thomas Carlyle is the author of Heroes and Hero Worship. The book comprises 6 lectures delivered by Carlyle on heroes and hero worship. The theme of his lecture is about the great man of history. Carlyle presents his own conception of hero. In fact, it is considered as an outstanding prose work of Victorian literature. Question 42. Who wrote Sohrab and Rustam? Answer. Matthew Arnold wrote Sohrab and Rustam. It is an epic poem. The theme of the poem is a filial love of Sohrab for his unknown mighty father Rustam. Question 43. What is the source of the poem Sohrab and Rustam? Answer. The poem is based on the popular Persian legend of duel between mighty father Rustam and his unknown son Sohrab. Persian poet Ferdowsi wrote Shahnameh, celebrating the heroism of Rustam. Arnold's source is Shahnameh is in writing the poem Sohrab and Rustam. Arnold took the materials of his poem from Shahnameh. Question 44. Who is the author of Culture and Anarchy? Answer. Culture and Anarchy is a collection of essays by Arnold. The work contains Arnold's criticism of Victorian society. His essays are critical about Victorian society. Unlike Carlyle, he does not glorify aristocratic class. Question 45. Who is Evie Browning? Answer. Evie Browning is the wife of Robert Browning. She is the popular female poet of the Victorian age. She wrote about famous love sonnets. Question 46. What was the pen name of Evie Browning? Answer. Portuguese was a pen name given to Evie Browning by her husband Browning. Her sonnets from the Portuguese were the best known love poems during her time. Question 47. Name some poems by Evie Browning. Answer. How Do I Love Thee, The Cry of the Children are some of her famous poems. She mainly wrote about love and children. She was moved by the misery of children working in factory. Question 48. Who is called the sages of Victorian age? Answer. The Victorian thinkers are the sages of Victorian age. The great thinkers of this age are Arnold, Carlyle, Newman, Ruskin, Darwin. These thinkers adequately expressed their views on Victorian life and society. Question 49. Who are Arthur Hugh Clough and Arthur Henry Hallam? Why are they important? Arthur Hugh Clough was a close friend of Arnold. Arnold wrote his elegy Tiresias to commemorate his friend and to give us an idea about Victorian society. Arthur Hallam was the bosom friend of Tennyson. Tennyson composed in memoriam in memory of his close friend Hallam and to give us the feeling of doubt caused by the clash between science and religion during the Victorian age. Question 50. Why is the Victorian age called an age of triumph for novel? Answer. Victorian age is an age for the success and development of English novel. The social factors like industrial revolution, conflict between science and religion, political, religious, scientific ideas influenced the Victorian age. Freedom of women was another factor that needed a narrative expression. As a result, novel as a form of literature developed during the Victorian age. Question 51. Who is called an optimist in the Victorian age? Answer. Robert Browning is called an optimist in the Victorian age. He was not concerned with the drama of his age, rather with human life in general. In an age of doubt, he expressed firm faith in God and life hereafter. His religious poems inspire faith in God. Question 52. Who is known as poet of elegy in Victorian literature? Answer. Matthew Arnold is called an elegiac poet because he composed elegies or elegiac poem to lament for the loss of values in the Victorian age. His poems reflect the spiritual crisis of the age. Hence, he chose elegy to comment on the Victorian age. Thank you, viewers, for watching.